Watches are incredibly subjective, and so for a watch snob like me, that makes it very easy to tell everyone else why their watch choices are wrong. Too big, too small, too complex, or too simple, I can figure out a way to criticize just about any watch, but not all of them. These are the Teflon-coated creations for whom criticism bounces off and sticks to its originator. The untouchable, affordable attractions that demand to be appreciated. Stay until the end or I'll unfollow you on MySpace. Our first heat-resistant hero repels rejection in a different way than you perhaps might expect. Is it masterfully built for a price smaller than the average LA K9? No. Does its style contend with the classics of our day? Far from it. Are the mechanics destined for the horological halls of fame? At best, the janitor's closet. No, the Eutour E024 is simply unhateable because its target demographic is the blind. Not only can you not hate on any owner of a golden retriever, you'd be hard pushed to really go toe-to-toe criticizing someone who literally can't see. Think about it. Someone born without the ability to see has never ever been able to lay their eyes on a sweet rack of finest herbs and spices. And that's tragic. So Atoll made this magnetic watch with a tactile readout so blind people could tell the time too. The fundamentals are quite simple. There are two ball bearings, trapped within infinite loops that take over from the hands you typically expect to see. Those are kept in place by hidden magnets, carried around the void beneath by basically sticking them to the original hands. The result? A watch you can feel out for the time by fingering those two little balls. Blind people have all the fun. For those blessed with the miracle of sight, the watch comes in 4 different colours: blue, blue and white, green and silver. Plus there's a black one, so if you can't see, or you're a middle-aged man with the colour coordination of Bozo the Clown, you'll have something that'll go with everything. It's a quartz movement inside a PVD'd 40mm copper case, so at £68 it's as cheap as an obstructed view concert ticket, which is one of just a handful of blind people perks no one really thinks about. And for those who have the misfortune of knowing what James Corden looks like, the Atoll is pretty stylish too. As I've aged, one singular truth has become painfully apparent. My favourite hobby isn't going to the movies or having a lovely evening stroll with the droogs. It's doing nothing. Literally nothing. Staring into space, catching flies, working on my couch divot. And no better watch is there for doing that with than the Mr. Jones A Perfectly Useless Afternoon. You know that sense of relief when your Saturday suddenly becomes free? That brat kid's birthday party gets cancelled or it's too wet outside for the office summer barbecue. That's the feeling captured by this Mr. Jones. The aimless bliss of having a day in the diary only notable for its emptiness. Within the 37mm stainless steel swimming pool drifts a lazy hour marker rereading Death on the Nile for the 800th time. An absent-minded toe dipped in the water, the best you're going to get when it comes to dividing the day into 12. If you want any more accuracy than that, then your best bet is to follow the yellow ducky minute hand as it lists about the edge. The design comes from the mind of Christoph Devos, an author and illustrator who's clearly trying to tell us something about his work ethic. And if you feel that floating in a pool isn't exactly your idea of a blissful brain-dead weekend, then he's also the illustrator of Mr. Jones Unplugged limited edition as well, which switches the lilo for a sofa and the squeak of a plastic duck for the crackle of vinyl. Now that's my kind of perfectly useless afternoon. And when that brat kid, your partner really wishes you wouldn't call him that, he's your own flesh and blood after all, gets better and barbecuing weather returns, you'll be able to spend the odd fleeting moment away from it all by glancing down at your A Perfectly Useless Afternoon to get you through all the screaming. At the work barbecue, obviously. Ironically though, the quartz movement inside is only protected to 50 meters, which is typically not recommended for swimming. For £225, however, you could give it a try. And if it stops, then, oh well, that's just more time to yourself. If you want the best on-paper watch that does so much for so little it must be made of pure concentrated nana, you cannot do better than the shiny silver addition to the Casio 2100 line, the Metal Casio. If you're unfamiliar with the original Casio, it's Casio's entrant into the integrated octagonal hype market, and is one of the rare few that's actually even better than the hype suggested. It's like listening to the Smiles inaugural album and discovering it's just about 3/4 a Radiohead release for 2/5 the effort. That's an analog handset with a digital accompaniment packed with features, now stacked inside a stainless steel case with nondescript metal bracelet for £279. Functions you'll enjoy include 5 daily alarms, that's 4 to wake up to and 1 for Wordle, world time and calendar across a whole bunch of places you've heard of and a whole bunch more you haven't, and both a countdown and count up timer, more commonly known as a chronograph. Not to mention, with 200 meters of water resistance, you literally only ever have to take it off when the smell becomes too much or the battery runs out in 3 years, whichever comes first. And it'll take whatever you can throw at it, or throw it at, thanks to that octagonal shape rendered in the universe's most useful material, metal. Don't let the gargantuan case size of 49 by 44mm put you off your consideration, because the case is basically its own lugs, making it wear surprisingly well on even the most malnourished of software developers' wrists. At less than 12mm thick as well, it wears just about the same as a Rolex Submariner, despite packing in many more features, and of course costing a whole lot less. Available in a selection of delicious colours, including lime green, sky blue, and orange. Well, orange. You've even got the option to choose between something that will go with any outfit, or none of them. If there's one thing even the snobs can agree on, it's that the original Star Wars trilogy is just about cinematic perfection, before George Lucas took off his training wheels for the prequel trilogy, and whatever it is Disney thinks it's doing. There were 3 perfect films about a boy and his relentless desire to become an intergalactic terrorist. Citizen honours that excellence with a watch Luke would eagerly step over his own aunt and uncle's child corpses to get. The Disney-era, licensing-friendly £379 Citizen Star Wars Rebel Pilot-inspired watch. The Citizen Star Wars Rebel Pilot-inspired watch has buttons, it has dials, and it has displays. And even if you don't know what they do, they look awesome. Thankfully, I do know what they do, so I'll tell you. There's 2 displays for time telling top left and top right, so you know when it's too late in the day to kiss your sister. Bottom left is the mode readout, so you don't get lost in the many functions of the watch. Alternatively, you can just show off to your mates and let the force guide you. Then there's a multi-function display that tells you the day and date and gives you access to the chronograph. Plus, there's a temperature gauge that reads from the port left middle. Note how the port has a protective grate on it. If only the Empire had thought of that. If you like your droids sassy, then there's also R2-D2 and C-3PO versions as well, in white and blue and gold respectively. Unfortunately, the R2-D2 one doesn't double up as a lockpick, although I get the impression the C-3PO edition's going to talk shit about you the moment you turn your back. For those who shoot first and ask questions later, you'll enjoy the Millennium Falcon variant, which I'm told is a little more reliable than its namesake. It's a 45 by 33mm stainless steel piece of junk in the absolute best way. And what better partner could you have on your journey to discovering that you were born because your dad banged his babysitter? As for the watch, if you don't think it's the best thing ever, then he doesn't like you. I don't like you either. Talking of alternate pasts, Anders & Co have diligently put together a chronograph inspired by the golden years of the 30s and 40s, when London rocked harder than Las Vegas by blasting the night sky with spotlights, and thick, heavy window blinds were all the rage. If the class and quality that's since been replaced by frayed jeans and face tattoos is your thing, the AC1 chronograph may be what's tamping your pipe. We've seen a few watches like this from the likes of such brands as Furlan Marry, and the Anders & Co follows a similar formula. It's got a Seiko VK64 mechanical quartz inside, it's got sedate styling up front, and at £425 it isn't going to dent the dime pile too much either. You'll recognise those radially embossed pusher tips that seem to be the law on a watch like this. The case is basically a carbon copy of all those other vintage-inspired chronographs, to the millimetre, being 38mm across and 11mm thick. It's a great size, perhaps the best, if you like to spend your day cosplaying as Cary Grant. Maybe keep the window shut and avoid open fields. Away from danger, it's a watch that looks absolutely fantastic, paired with a slim grey suit and a pair of Oliver Peoples. What makes this watch stand out from the others? First off, there's a very appealing set of colours, including copper salmon and minty fresh, plus a colour that best describes England all year round, winter green. Then it's got a frosted dial finish that looks like mochi, set with black hands and applied markers. Except the winter green, which looks perhaps even nicer with white markers contrasted against a sunburst dial. And last of all, it's one of the most minimal approaches to this kind of watch I've seen, which gives it a time capsule fresh feeling that's entirely irresistible. It's really a totem made in honour of the greatest generation, without whom all of this would have been in German. Sticking to the chronograph theme for a minute is just about the best value for money function this side of the Spendthrift Society's annual Christmas dinner, the Sea-Gull 1963. Unlike most of what we'll see here today, it's the only watch that's overtly Chinese, instead of just pretending not to be. Why 1963? Well, the truth of the matter is there's more Swiss heritage in this thing than many Swiss brands today, because 1963 is when the Chinese watchmaker purchased Swiss chronograph manufacturer Venus, whose caliber 175 is now known the world over as the most affordable hand-wound chronograph you can get. Yes, that cheap egg timer inside, now called the ST19, traces its history back to Europe like a middle-class American, except Sea-Gull didn't make it their entire identity. In fact, on the proper original 1963, you don't even get to see the caliber. There's a solid back on this 40mm stainless steel case, embellished with Chinese writing that I'm pretty sure someone somewheres inadvertently had tattooed. You can tell it's a legacy movement design because not only does it predate automatic winding by 6 years, it's also a slow beating ticker at 21,600 vibrations per hour, with a short power reserve of just 45 hours. It's quite literally an old timer, but that's why we love it. It makes the watch a little thicker at 14.5mm, which balances a little tall on its 40mm case, a stepped case back absorbing some of the visual weight. But it's hard to complain when it's basically one of the few affordable manually wound chronograph watches in the world, and perhaps the only one that can truly call itself in-house. What makes this watch so legendary is that no other manufacturer today, Swiss or otherwise, perpetuates an affordable hand-wound chronograph. Not until you get to the toppy thousands of the Omega Speedmaster. Sea-Gull, therefore, is something of a global treasure within our particular niche, and one you can own for less than £500. Who can possibly find fault with a watchmaker looking to furnish hard-done-by collectors with affordable excellence? Not even the Snobs, that's who. This is Zelos, a Singaporean outfit established to do exactly that, making the unobtainable tainable. For the Nova 37mm, Zelos upped the stakes with a flagship selection in Meteorite and a Venturine with a tantalum case, but even though it's still a bargainous buy at just £1,600, it's not the bargainist. That accolade goes to the Mosaic mother of pearl, whose stainless steel case gets sent to another dimension with a medley of nature's most closeted crustacean. For £750, the Zelos doesn't just get a mother of pearl dial, which would have been nice if a little unoriginal. The small seconds arrangement is decked out with a patio of pieces cut into a kaleidoscopic grinder, each a window to a different sunset sky, like the shattered fragments of an aging memory. It's like that, or Liberace's business card. How is such a dial assembled? Carefully. There's over 175 fragments of shell in this mollusky mosaic, and I know that because I counted them. Each one is snuggled up to its neighbour with barely enough room to breathe. The inner section is a lighter, more natural tone, whilst the outside gets a blue tint that brings out the contrast in the iridescence. Fun fact, that colourful display exists in pearl because of a nacreous layer that lines the inside of shellfish. It's made of a compound of calcium carbonate called aragonite, whose structural thickness is similar to the wavelength of visible light, interfering with it and splitting it into its component parts. Basically, fish crust makes sun go sparkle sparkle. Keeping things trim is a hand-wound Swiss 7001, making the case a scarcely believable 7mm thin. With no automatic winding, the goings-on inside are free to be seen, the power following from the mainspring down through the gear train and into the beating escapement. It's not as well finished here as it is in the Furlan Marri Disco Volante, but then it is almost a third the price. There's a party in the Nova 37's MOP and everyone's invited. If you're looking for a daily wear with a flair of fun and a spec sheet filled like a phone-side notepad, then the C60 Atoll 300 from Christopher Ward is a hard watch to push back on. I tend to gravitate towards the brand's more outlandish offerings because I'm just the kind of dude who likes to dazzle, but not every day can be a bel canto day, and that's where the Atoll's most at home. For a start, it's £760 for a Swiss-made dive watch with 300 meters water resistance, and already that's sounding better than butter on bread. But that's just the beginning. The 120-click bezel has more stops than a suburban bus route. The lume glows brighter than a Fukushima fish. It's double glazed in sapphire, and the Sellita Caliber SW200 is finished with a custom Christopher Ward motif. But hearing about the Atoll, as good as it sounds, doesn't beat seeing it, thanks to an Indian Ocean inspired pool set within the 40mm by 11.3mm thick steel case. It's as inviting as an RSVP, and as far as the Indian Ocean goes, it's pretty accurate, with Christopher Ward's trash logo floating at the top. I actually like that logo, to be honest, but the joke always comes first. It's a hard watch to criticise. You'd have better luck finding fault with Keanu Reeves. Sure, the design isn't the most original, and maybe the logo's a little wooden, but when it's out here giving its all, putting on so much of a show and asking for so little in return, offering a bad word about it feels like drop-kicking a puppy into a statue of Princess Diana. And you know what I really like? The attention to detail. Look how the date window matches not just the dial colour, but the print as well. If Christopher Ward can do that at £760, anyone else who chooses not to is doing so for spite. It's the ideal date. At 6, away from the entrance, alone. Fellow British watch brand Farah has set out to create the perfect time-only watch, with the Resolute II its most flawless attempt at the archetypal three-hander. The commitment to this ideal can be measured in words, specifically 2, as the Resolute is in fact a singular variation of a collection pointedly titled Three Hand. If you want the Resolute in green, for example, it's not the Resolute, it's the Discovery Olive, the technical name for that moment in life when you finally start liking olives. In burgundy, it's just called the Discovery. They couldn't think of a purple pizza topping to go with it. It goes on, the blue three-hand is the Hopewell 3, and the black the Erebus 2. You'll get the hang of it with practice. Back to the Resolute, and we've got a clean white dial in a 40mm case whose sides are curved and polished, very reminiscent of vintage Rolex. There's something about that form that makes a watch feel expensive, especially sat next to a more common straight-sided case design. But it's that dial that's really tying the room together, because although it's simple, what little it's got going on is working really hard to earn your £895. Take a look side on and you'll see what I mean, because those seemingly printed markers hover a millimetre above the dial, thanks to a juicy block of purest lume. So come nighttime, the dials are glowing like the emergency exits are here, here and here. Remember, the nearest marker may be behind you. Under that glow, you'll see the dial copies pushing its kerning so hard it's got 20th Century Fox trying to buy the film rights. I can see the movie poster now. Automatic, starring Chris Pratt, ruined by Ridley Scott. It seems like a silly detail to dwell on, but there's just something that looks so good about spaced out text. Rolex can't do it, obviously. There's not enough room for all those words. It's got a pop of peppermint blue during the day too, which contrasts nicely against the bright orange second hand, which sources its power from the La Joux G101 beneath. What the Resolute II lacks in complication, it more than makes up for in charm. It's a strange world where the most expensive watch in our unbeatable budget lineup is also its first Seiko, but here it is, the £900 Presage Classic SPB465J1, here to make something of a point. For many, Seiko has been an entry into budget watch collecting, the £100 SNXS a bigger bang for the buck than fireworks on the 5th of July. But now it's looking to up the stakes by doing cheap better. Yes, expensive Seiko already exists, but this is somewhat different, still aiming to be the absolute most affordable in its segment, just in a segment that's slightly higher up. To the casual observer, this still looks like your typical affordable Seiko in style, but in fit and finish, it's a different story. The dial is nicely textured, the hands smoothly curved, and the clasp a double deployant. Bracelet links alternate between brushed and polished, and so too do the cascade of surfaces flowing down the case from the bezel. It's part of a trio of watches called the Classic series, each wearing a very demure colour to tell you they've all grown up and are now extra mature. There's a forest green called the Sensaicha, a pale salmon that gets the more glottal stop laden name Aragaki, and an ivory cream that goes by Shiro Iro. According to Google Translate, those mean 3-year-old tea, washing is coming, and white. Your internet translation mileage may vary. But the ace in the hole for Seiko's luxury budget alternative is with the 6R55 caliber, which is jam-packed with 3 days of power reserve. So you might be thinking to yourself that this struggles to compete with Tissot's Powermatic 80 series, but that's where the subtlety of finish comes into play. We're all used to budget Seiko build quality. It's strong but rough around the edges, like a half-finished gobstopper. You know why the price was cheap. With this, the lines have been blurred between the more expensive Seikos and perhaps even King Seiko, in which this movement is also seen. The problem is, there's just so much Seiko. Keeping up with it all is basically impossible. You've got more chance of approaching understanding watching Tenet through a letterbox. So the Presage Classic will likely get lost in between its cheaper and more expensive siblings, and that means for those seeking it out, it could become even more of a bargain yet. And remember, it's not like shopping for beans at the supermarket. Think of the price as merely a suggestion that you sincerely disagree with. See you next time.